A pregnant bobcat knocked on the hearts of two closed-off souls. A giant python, lost in the cold forest, pulled their fates closer together. No one in the town of Elderwood could have guessed that on a windless March night, life and death would wrestle beside a rotting wooden fence. And that, a mother bobcat, gasping under the tightening grip of fate, would remind them that as long as a heart can still ache, it can still love. This is not just a story about saving a wild animal. It's a journey of two people, one who lost a child, the other a mother, learning how to step out of the darkness again. And it all began when a cry echoed from the birch forest. In the mountain town of Elderwood, where the edge of the birch woods brushes up against old wooden porches and nature's breath seeps into every corner, there exists a delicate balance between the wild and the ordinary. Here, spring doesn't just bring the scent of damp earth and whispering streams, but also awakens things that have never been named. Clara Jensen lived in a small gray-roofed house at the very end of a moss-covered dirt road. At 42, she worked as a nurse at the Elderwood Hospice, a place where people came to pass on in peace. But outside of work, Clara was a quiet keeper of forgotten lives. Stray cats, limping squirrels, fallen birds, and sometimes souls who only needed a yard where no one would chase them away. Her garden wasn't perfect, but it had something that lonely creatures could sense, a silent kind of acceptance. Every morning before leaving the house, Clara would set out a clean bowl of water and small portions of meat along the fence line, where the birch forest began to cast shadows across the ground, as a silent ritual for those who lived beyond the boundary. It was on a late winter morning, just as spring began to stir and mist still clung to the willow branches, that Clara first saw Willow. Unlike the strays and skunks that had wandered through before, Willow, a pregnant female bobcat, emerged from the forest's shadow as if time itself paused to watch her walk past. Her fur shimmered amber, streaked with black markings that looked painted in ink. Though her belly was full, her gait was light as wind, and her eyes sharp yet not hostile, as if wary but still hoping. Clara, with years of experience caring for wildlife, did not approach. She simply placed another piece of raw chicken near the edge of the woods and stepped back, standing on her porch, whispering, "You can stay, Willow. It's safe here." From that day on, Willow appeared every morning, always keeping her distance, but each time she accepted the small gift like a ritual. Clara began speaking to her in a voice as gentle as a breeze passing through a window. "You don't have to trust humans, but if you must, believe this, I won't hurt you." Across from Clara's home, on the other side of the red dirt road, stood an old wooden house that looked forgotten by time. Its owner, Ben Calder, a former firefighter, now lived quietly with his dog, Rusty. 2 years ago, Ben's wife and daughter died in a fire. That was also the day he stopped speaking much to the world. Ben didn't tend his yard. The asters once planted by his wife had been swallowed by weeds. The house itself wore an air of indifference, just like its owner. Only Rusty, the loyal dog who once belonged to his daughter, still stood guard each night and quietly lay beside the old armchair every dawn. From his second-floor window, Ben had seen Willow. He'd also seen Clara each morning, her movements small but steady as clockwork. He didn't call out, didn't intervene, just watched silently, like a part of the forest listening in. "Don't go near her, Rusty," Ben would often whisper during their early morning walks. And Rusty understood. He didn't chase, didn't bark. He only lifted his head toward the tree line, where the pregnant bobcat sometimes appeared, ears tuned to every sound, eyes as if waiting for something. Clara didn't know whether Willow stayed out of instinct or something else, but she could sense each change in the wildcat's eyes and stride, as if Willow, somehow, was hoping for the survival of something more fragile than herself. And somewhere in the birch forest, something else was quietly approaching, not hope, but a threat. A creature that did not belong here, but survived by breaking every natural order. Under the pale March sky of elderwood, the birch forest began to bud. But not all forms of life rise gently. Ben Calder sat behind his computer screen, the cold blue light casting shadows across a face long unfamiliar with genuine smiles. In his headphones, a trainee was babbling about wind direction and flight paths. But Ben had stopped listening, barking, sharp and intense. It came from Rusty, the usually quiet and perceptive dog. Ben frowned, removed his headset, and rose instinctively. Rusty kept barking, a deep growl echoing against the mountain. This wasn't a bark for moths or scampering squirrels. This was the call of life under threat. Then the phone rang. On the screen appeared a name he didn't expect, Clara Jensen. They had only exchanged a few pleasantries last month during a neighborhood safety meeting, but now she was calling. He answered. Ben? Clara's voice cracked in panic. There's a giant python. It's coiled around Willow, right at the edge of my yard. I don't know what to do. Ben didn't ask questions. He only said, "Stay on the line. I'm coming." When Ben arrived, the scene before him brought the past flooding back like an unannounced wave. Willow, the pregnant bobcat, was tightly wrapped in the crushing coils of a Burmese python. Its body coiled thick as a log, its scales gleaming pale gold in the late sun. Willow writhed, gasping, claws raking madly at the ground, but her strength was fading. Clara stood just a few steps away, hands trembling, eyes locked on each painful constriction of the snake. "Ben," she whispered when she saw him, as if finally finding something to cling to in the storm. Ben said nothing. His eyes scanned the yard, calculating. He spotted a dry willow branch over a meter long, leaning beside the fence, the only thing that could serve as a lever. "Clara, listen to me." His voice was low, clear, and weighted with purpose. "I'm going to loosen its coils. When I give the signal, pull Willow out as fast as you can." She nodded, tears streaming, but her stance was steadier now. Ben signaled to Rusty, "Bark." Rusty roared. A fierce volley. The python turned its head, exactly as Ben had hoped, its coils slackening for a split second. Seizing the moment, Ben lunged, wedged the dry branch between the snake and Willow's body, leaned his weight in, and leveraged with all his might. "Now, Clara." Clara rushed in as if she herself were being suffocated, grabbed Willow's front legs, and pulled with all her strength from the survival trap. Willow cried out but twisted herself along. When her full body was dragged from the final coil, Clara collapsed to the ground, still clutching the trembling bobcat like a child. The python slowly slithered back, its long body retreating into the woods. Not out of fear, but because its prey had been stolen. But today, it lost. Ben exhaled hard, sweat beading on his brow, his heart pounding like he'd just escaped a burning building. Willow lay gasping, her eyes no longer wild, but drained. But she was alive. Clara looked at him, still choking back emotion. "You saved her." Ben looked down at the creature lying in Clara's arms. A wild being, seemingly never meant to belong among humans, yet today, saved by two strangers giving everything they had left. "Number we did," he replied. Then turned to Rusty, bent down and patted his head. "Good job, buddy." The last light of day spread golden across Willow's body, and in that moment, none of them were who they used to be. Beneath a soft bronze sunset, the entire garden seemed to hold its breath. Clara knelt beside Willow, the mother bobcat, now utterly exhausted. her body curled and trembling in the trampled weeds. Though she had escaped death's grip, her breathing remained labored, eyes half shut, the muscles in her neck still strained from pain and panic. Ben stood a few steps away, his hand still tightly gripping the willow branch, now snapped in two from the struggle. His breathing hadn't yet steadied, but his eyes were focused, as if every remaining sense was locked onto one purpose: saving this animal. "She's not okay," Clara whispered, her voice shaky but clear. Her heart's racing. There could be internal damage, and I think she's going into labor. Willow didn't run. Though her bruised body could still flee into the forest, she remained there among humans. Her golden eyes opened faintly, watching Ben and Clara with a weary resignation, but not fear. Ben crouched to look at the struggling creature, then turned to Clara. "My garage is empty," he said, as if it had already been decided. "It's heated, sheltered. We can set up a space for her to rest." Clara looked at him, surprised for a moment, then nodded softly. "Are you sure?" Ben didn't answer, but his eyes, softer than they had been in years, did. He was no longer the shut-away man behind a veil of grief, but someone opening the door again, even if only for a dying bobcat. They moved like a coordinated emergency team. Ben fetched the large dog crate still stored in his shed. Clara called Dr. Eliza Monroe, a wildlife veterinarian who once helped her save a deer hit by a car. Willow didn't resist when they gently approached. Clara draped a soft towel over her eyes to reduce panic. Then she and Ben carefully lifted the weary body into the crate. Every movement was slow, whispered, as if cradling a newborn. Dr. Monroe arrived within 40 minutes, still in her windbreaker, carrying a medical kit and the sharp gaze of someone who had seen the worst but never lost faith in life. After a thorough check with a stethoscope and a gentle touch along each limb, she looked up. No broken bones. Fortunately, the coils didn't cut off circulation, but she placed her hand on Willow's belly. "The stress has triggered early labor. She'll give birth within hours." Clara clasped her hands tightly, as if her own heart had just entered an unexpected labor. "Transporting her to the rescue center now would be too risky," Eliza continued. "The best thing we can do is keep her still, keep her warm, and monitor closely." Ben nodded. "Garage is ready. We can start right away." Before long, Ben's cold, dusty garage had been transformed into a peaceful sanctuary. They partitioned off a corner with soft barriers, laid down blankets, and placed a low heater at a safe distance. Eliza installed a baby monitor-style camera inside the crate, normally used for newborn puppies so they could avoid entering and causing more stress. Once everything was in place, Clara and Ben sat on the porch, the soft light from the garage glowing like candlelight. Rusty lay between them, head lifted toward the place where new life waited to be born. "It's strange," Ben murmured, voice wandering into itself. "I thought I'd never be able to do anything meaningful again." Clara turned toward him, her face softened by twilight. "You just saved a soul, and 5 more are on the way." Ben said nothing, but when his hand brushed hers, he didn't pull away. Then a soft beep came from the monitor. Clara stood up abruptly, eyes glistening. "Willow's going into labor." Willow had crossed the threshold. Curled in soft blankets inside Ben's garage, the mother bobcat panted, drenched in sweat and forest dust. But beneath her fragile body, 5 tiny lives had arrived, each breath faint, each cry delicate, as if the world itself paused to listen. Clara sat beside the baby monitor on the tool bench, still clutching a mug of tea gone cold. Next to her, Ben stood silent as stone, but his eyes, in the amber glow, were moist. Rusty lay at their feet, head resting on his paws, eyes turned toward the closed door, behind which a quiet miracle was unfolding. "Both mother and cubs are stable," Eliza said softly after the final check. Her voice was like wind through birch leaves. "But the first 48 hours are critical. They need quiet, warmth, and complete privacy." Ben and Clara nodded in unison, as if they had just become guardians of sacred ground. The days that followed passed like a long dream. Clara visited each morning and after work, bringing fresh water, boiled chicken, and a gaze full of quiet affection. Ben, between his remote flight training sessions, silently watched the monitor, jotting notes into an old notebook he once used for firefighter drills. They didn't speak much, but the silences were no longer cold. Rusty often lay guarding the garage door like a sentinel of sleep. Strangely, his presence calmed Willow, as if he carried the scent of something safe, something remembered. The kittens grew quickly, their eyes opening, markings sharpening, voices ringing like silver bells. And one by one, they were named. Scout, the firstborn male, bold and always leading every exploration. Pip, the smallest, but always trying to climb higher than the rest. Luna and Star, two sisters who stirred at night, chasing each other like streaks of light across the garage. And finally, Sage, the quiet one, who watched and only moved once. Everything had stilled. Eliza smiled at the sight. "They're bobcats," she reminded gently. "Not pets. They were born to return to the wild." And then came that clear April morning, sooner than anyone expected. The sky was cloudless, the stream babbled softly, the air so blue and still, it felt like nature itself knew today was sacred. Ben, Clara, and Eliza, along with rangers from the Blue Ridge Wildlife Reserve, carefully transferred Willow and her kittens into special crates, lined with straw, well-ventilated and secure. The 80-kilometer journey north would be the final chapter of one story and the first of another. They chose a dense forest near a clear stream, carpeted with dry leaves and ancient trees. No footprints, no engines. Willow was released last. She stepped out of the crate as if she already knew this was home. Her head turned once, eyes meeting Clara's, then Ben's. No cry. No flick of her tail, just a look, powerful enough to tear down any wall ever built between humans and the wild. Then she was gone, along with her 5 young, fading into the forest, into dappled light and the scent of damp earth. On the way back to Elderwood, the car swayed gently with each bend around the mountain. Clara sat silently in the passenger seat. Ben drove slowly, as if unwilling to let the farewell just now become the past too quickly. His hand brushed Clara's, not out of fear this time, but out of gratitude. "Thank you," he said, eyes on the road. "For what?" she asked softly. "For calling me that day, for reminding me that there are still things worth caring about, that life, no matter how fragile, deserves to be protected." Clara took his hand. "And thank you for opening the door, for a bobcat, and for me." Ben said nothing. But in the rearview mirror, Rusty lay curled up, peacefully asleep, as if the soul of that house had finally found rest. A year passed since Willow and her cubs vanished into the woods, as if nature had turned a new chapter, yet left the old page marked where the reader's heart refused to turn away. Clara and Ben stood together on the porch of his small wooden home, once a fortress for a lost soul, now a quiet refuge for 2 people, 3 hearts, and things that couldn't be named. Late afternoon in Elderwood always wore a strange shade of orange, as if the sky were lighting candles to escort the sun back to the mountains. That glow bathed the front yard in gold, where the grass grew evenly and the white daisies had bloomed again after years of being buried under weeds. Rusty stretched out on the front step, head resting on his front paws, ears twitching slightly as he listened to every whisper of wind drifting from the birch forest. They had just returned from the Blue Ridge Wildlife Preserve, where rangers reported occasional sightings of a bobcat family hunting by the stream. A proud-looking mother, 5 grown cubs, moving like dappled shadows in the fading light. No one could say for sure if it was Willow, but Clara's heart told her it was. "It's strange," Clara whispered, leaning her head on Ben's shoulder. "Some things come so suddenly, like a storm, and leave behind a garden." Ben gently squeezed her shoulder. "And sometimes it takes a python to remind us it's time to live again." They both laughed, not loudly, just a soft sound, but enough to scatter the fear that once clung inside their chests. Ben's garage was no longer a makeshift maternity ward, but it hadn't returned to what it was either. It had become a small workshop where Ben built feeding stations for wildlife, tiny wooden shelters for stray cats, or freeze-resistant water troughs for the snowy season. Clara delivered them across Elderwood, handing them to nature lovers who didn't yet know where to begin. They kept the old baby monitor, now placed on a wooden shelf beside a framed photo of Willow and her cubs. Beside it sat another picture. James, Ben's son, as a little boy, hugging Rusty when he was still a puppy. That photo had once been tucked away in a drawer. Now it was displayed with care, not as a wound, but as a piece of memory finally loved again. On quiet evenings, Clara and Ben often walked together to the edge of the forest, the place where they once heard Willow's desperate cry, where a fight for survival had opened a door no one expected. They never saw the python again. But sometimes, much later, when the moon hung above the treetops, they'd spot a faint silhouette among the leaves, silent, free and proud. It might have been Willow. It might not, but that no longer mattered. What mattered was they had walked through the impossible together. That a mother bobcat, a python, a broken willow branch, and a heart willing to open could change an entire life. And that we were never meant to go through life alone.